It's the Deadline Junkies Screenwriting Podcast with your hosts, Jordan Imiola, Kirsten Porter, and Ran Shami.
Well, as you guys may notice, Ran is not with us today because she is actually busy working on another show called Not Dead Yet. And coincidentally, it stars Gina Rodriguez, who is also the star of one of the shows that our guest wrote for. And today, our guest, oh yes, there it is. Our guest is Liz Sczudlo, screenwriter for Awkward, The Following, Switched at Birth, Dynasty, and my personal favorite, who also stars Gina Rodriguez, Jane the Virgin. Welcome, Liz.
Oh, thank you. Although I have to say, it's funny. I watched one of your Zooms, and I'm curious if anyone else doesn't identify as a screenwriter, because I always think of screenwriters as TV writer or as feature writers.
Oh, no one.
And like in the Writers Guild, when they talk about screenwriter issues, it always means feature writers. And I'm a television writer. I wouldn't even know how to write a feature film. Give me a lot of money to screw it up.
But I thought you did Hallmark movies.
Oh yeah, I suppose those count as yeah, that's true. Done some Hallmark movies. Touche. And I wrote a Lifetime pilot once that they recut and aired as a movie. So it has, I still get like angry fans on Twitter being like, why is there no ending to this Lifetime movie? I'm like, well, because it was a pilot that was supposed to go on for 22 episodes. So they cut the first two into an hour-long movie with no ending.
They didn't correct that or anything. They just were like, eh.
Yeah, they took what we shot and they made it into a 2-hour movie. So
wow, it can be done.
Yeah. Well, what made you want to write and create?
Great question. I was like a highly dramatic theater kid with a lot of big feelings, and I always thought that I was gonna go to New York and do Broadway and like get to spend my whole life like being in the revival of Rent. And then when I was in high school, this movie came out that Diane Keaton directed called Hanging Up. And it was her and Meg Ryan and Lisa Kudrow as adult women trying to deal with their dying alcoholic parents. And there were a lot of themes and things in that movie that were really parallel to my own traumatizing teenage life. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, there's someone out there in Hollywood who knows exactly what it was like to grow up how I grew up. And like Broadway's only for rich people who can go to New York and see the theater. Like if I get into writing let's time on to direct, if I make movies, I can like tell stories that reach nerdy 14-year-olds in Maryland. And so I like totally in 10th grade went from like, I'm going to be a musical star to like, I'm going to direct. Like I was like, I'm going to be Julie Taymor. And who makes those highly relatable, grounded films. And so I went to film school for directing actually. And for a long time thought that was my track. And I, sort of imagined myself out there, with the beret and the director's chair and other props that directors have. There's always a good
megaphone.
Scarf. Exactly. But, I eventually realized that all my friends who were like actual directors were out there every weekend, like shooting stuff with their handy cams and cutting it together and putting it on YouTube. And I just had like no interest in that and doing that with my weekend time. Like it's just not even a little bit appealing. But I was writing the whole time because that like, oh, well, I have to write things to direct if I'm, and and then I eventually got, a couple of years later got introduced to sort of the world of TV writing, which UCLA at the time did not cover at all. And it was like, oh, this is all the amazing parts of directing. Like all the things that I loved about directing and creating, TV writers have control over. And all the parts I have no interest in, like figuring out the angles and the lenses and the blocking, like that's what the directors do over here. But as a TV writer, I can control casting and I can control the look of the show and the aesthetic and the wardrobe and the set deck. And so yeah, sort of my first time in a TV room, I was like, these people are doing exactly what I want to do, which is like tell stories, but get a little more of my own vision and my own sensibility into it than you would if you just, wrote a screenplay in your attic and sold it and never saw it again.
So how did you get your first TV writing job, 90210?
Well, I went to film school and graduated with no connections and a lot of debt and no health insurance. This is pre-Obamacare for those of young listeners who don't know how good they have it. And I worked at a place called the New York Film Academy as sort of a side hustle to make money. And in the meantime, I like really wanted birth control, but I didn't have any health insurance because I was young and slutty in Los Angeles. And I read somewhere that LAUSD, the LA Unified School District, if you substitute taught for 6 months, would give you health insurance. And then I also read that if you taught in like sort of the worst schools, they would give you extra, they'd give you battle pay. Not true, as it turns out. So I got certified to substitute teach, and I thought, oh, okay, like I can substitute teach, and then when I get called for these directing gigs people want to call me for, I don't have to, I'm a sub, so I can just go in and out. And I looked up the 4 most dangerous schools in Los Angeles and marched on over with my resume and said, hi, I'm a teacher. You should hire me. And the school in East LA was like, okay, come back tomorrow. 22-year-old. And I ended up substitute teaching at the school every day for like 6 weeks. And then the principal came to me around Halloween and said, hey, you're really good at this. Do you want to be a real teacher? And I was like, I'm an idiot. I went to film school. And she was like, that's fine. I don't care. It's really, she's like, classroom management's really hard. I can give you a curriculum. And so, this is all a really long way to say that I didn't get into the film industry after going to film school. I taught high school for 2 years. And I was I was in a writer's group all the time on the weekends, like sort of writing short stuff and helping make, it was actually sketch comedy, which is not anything I've ended up doing with my life. But I was like getting my master's in education, and I was going to leave LA and like go be a teacher somewhere cool. And I got a call from someone that I'd worked with at the summer camp at the New York Film Academy. And she said, my husband works on 90210, and the showrunner's assistant just quit in tears with no notice. And she is tough and demanding and mercurial and all these things. But what I've noticed working with you in this very stressful summer camp for very, very wealthy children is that you're really good with people who are like that. Like you have a real knack for dealing with difficult people. And if you can deal with her, she's also brilliant and inspiring and creative and an incredible writer. And I think you could really learn from her. And so I went in for this interview on 90210 with Rebecca Rand Kirshner Sinclair, who now goes by Rebecca X, for those of you who are familiar with the Joss Whedon article in which she had a co-starring role. Google it. And we started this like I was like, I'm a high school teacher. I don't know what I'm doing. I like didn't even bring my resume. I forgot how to do a job interview. I was wearing clogs because I was the high school teacher. And we just sort of like hit it off, and she was like, okay. And I didn't even love UCLA, love their film program, love how many students go on to win student Oscars and place their short films in competitions. There was no, at the time, it's been a minute, there was no practical knowledge about working in Hollywood. And so I didn't even know, like one of our post pays is like, why are you putting Brad's in all 3 holes in the script? And I was like, because there's 3 holes. And he was like, yeah, we don't do that in Hollywood. And I was like, okay, great. Or the phone would ring and I would answer, and it'd be like, oh, this is the, swing from set deck. I need Rebecca. And I'd be like, one moment, please. And I have to Google like, what is a swing? What is set deck? Like I didn't know anything. So it's a really big learning curve. And fortunately, the most important thing in that job was to have an ability to work with a highly sensitive, creative, fast-paced woman, and that I could do. But she had to come to me one day because I would like answer the phone, and she was like, I think you're supposed to answer the phone in like a certain way. So I'd be like, hello. And I was like, well, what do I say? And she was like, oh, I don't know. I was never an assistant. And so I literally called CBS TV studios, and I asked their assistant, like, what do I say when I answer the phone? And she was like, I guess 90210 writer's office. This is Liz. And I was like, okay, great. Thanks. Like I was an idiot. I knew nothing. So the fact that I'm here is really a testament to like dumb luck and people who don't deserve it always getting ahead in life.
Yeah, but you were resourceful. You definitely, like calling and asking instead of being like, well, I don't know, I'll just wait until somebody tells me not to.
Right.
That says something about you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And and I think it's once you have your Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, it was a stupid joke. I was saying you could say 90210 hello.
Yeah. Medium joke.
Okay, see, now Jordan wouldn't get ahead.
Mm-hmm. By the way, have you guys seen that 90210 pho is gone? Which is my favorite play on words restaurant. If you pronounce it incorrectly, it's 90210 pho, but if you pronounce it right, it's 90210 pho, which delighted me to no end. But it went under in the pandemic. Yeah, and then I had a pretty typical path from there, because I think once you get your foot in the door in any TV writing assistant position, it's much easier to move up from there. So I worked for Rebecca. I wrote to Rebecca's desk for a year, and I did crazy stuff. At the time, I had no idea that there were like things you probably shouldn't be asking your assistant to do. Like, she one time asked me to drive to Atwater Village and buy 12 shades of pale pink paint that were baby safe, like special baby safe pale pink paint, and then drive to her house in the hills and paint and label all 12 shades on the wall of her office, on the north wall of her office, and label them so that when she got home at sunset, she could see which one she liked best in the setting sun, but it had to be dry by then, which is why I had to go in the middle of the day and do it. I tell these stories with love, by the way. If she listened to this, I believe would be cackling at these stories as well. So, you know, it was crazy. I did anything she asked me to do, because that was, I was so awed to be in Hollywood and to have this opportunity to be on the 90210. It was a big show. And I just tried to sort of soak up everything that I've so many mentors still from that show, because I was like this very young, naive person, be like, tell me everything, teach me your ways. And after a year, she left, and they were going to bring in some new showrunners. And I got a call from a woman named Liz Merriweather, whom you might be familiar with.
New Girl.
And she said, I just created a show called New Girl. And I heard that you survived a year on Rebecca Sinclair's desk. And I'd love to meet you. So I went and had coffee with Liz Merriweather, who was like, I think the show's going to go. I think like it might be a hit. What do you want to come work for me? And then the next day I had a meeting with the new showrunners in NM210, who said, we're first time showrunners. We hear you really know everyone. And because I learned everything my first year. Like, will you stay and help us? And I really agonized over those two, like, New Girl seems like this, it's going to be this like sexy new show, and 90210, though I know and I'm comfortable with. And I had this like really long sort of agonizing weekend. And I called my friend John, who was a little further ahead on his career path than and I said, I called everyone that I knew to get opinions. And some people were like, don't be an idiot, go to New Girl, it's going to be huge. Other people were like, well, you know everyone at 90210, you can't mess it. Anyway, back and forth. And then John finally gave me the advice that sealed it, which was, don't ever chase the sexy when you're trying to get in. Because he said, I took a job with a very famous director right out of college, and it was a big deal and everyone's heard of him. And I didn't learn anything that year. I could brag that I was working for this very famous person, but it didn't help me get anywhere, and I didn't learn anything. And he said, New Girl's going to be huge. They're pulling in the 30 rock writers. They're pulling in the United States of Terror writers, and they're never going to give an assistant a script. And he said, so what you need to do is figure out if 90210 is ever going to give assistants a script, because if they will, you should stay there and try to get a script. And he said, and if they won't, then, fuck it, go over to New Girl and meet some new people, make some new connections. But your goal isn't to be on a show that's going to impress your friends and family when you post it on Facebook. Your goal is to get onto a show that has a path into writing. And so I went back to the 90210 showrunners and I said, here's the deal. I want to be a writer. I want to do this. I'm not going to learn anything new. I learned every single thing there was about 90210 last year. Like, I can say with certainty that nobody knows 90210 better than I do. And so the only thing left is like to know that maybe you'll help me like get ahead and get on this path to writing. And they said, give us 1 year on our desk as our assistant so we can get our feet under us as showrunners, and then we'll make you writer's assistant and give you a freelance. And so I called Liz Merriweather and I turned her down, and no, I didn't. I chickened out. I wrote her an email and she never responded. And I, for many years, dreaded the day that I'd run into her. And then I finally did last year, and she had no idea who I was. Didn't even remember. And I stayed at 90210, and sure enough, I did a year on their desk, and they said, whenever you're not working, whenever you're not busy, come sit in the room, come listen, like they were really mentorly showrunners. And then they kept their promise, and they put me in the room the next year as writer's assistant and said, your writer's assistant, but pitch as much as you want, contribute as much as you can, and we'll give you a script. And they were true to their word. And then we got canceled, and I went on to be a writer's assistant on another show. And after a few months, I got a call from some writers from 90210 who had taken over another show's showrunners and were like, we're going to staff you. So it was like that year in that room where I was really empowered to have a voice and speak and pitch that got me my first staff job too, because those writers were like, you were so great as an assistant. We'd love to bring you in as a staff writer. So that was a very long story. Sorry.
I loved it.
Yeah,
And you
great.
downplayed it, but I have to say, it wasn't just dumb luck. I mean, you were resourceful. You learned as much as you could. You were a sponge and soaked up everything.
Yeah.
You went out and got more information. You figured out how to paint this pink on a wall that is, you had to find out is northeast. I'm not even 100% sure how to figure that out at this point in my life. And you made things happen, and you were likable, and you made a good impression enough that people want to be around you. So you did a lot.
I'm going to respond to that because I actually think there's something very important in what you said. There's two parts of it. The first part is the painting the pale pink paint. And I think it is important to note that we are in a different era of television, and there are healthier boundaries generally, I think, between showrunners and assistants. And like at my last job, there was a sign that CBS posted in like every public room that said like, CBS Television Studios wants to remind you that television assistants may not be used for any personal, whatever the language was, but basically like they literally posted signs around being like, they can't even make you a doctor's appointment, right? Like, so, well, yes, it is so true that my hard work paid off. I also think there's like a really fine line between letting yourself get taken advantage of and abused and do a huge amount of work for not enough compensation. So I don't want people to walk away from this being like, I'm going to sell my soul and that'll get me to TV writing. Cause like, I don't know that that was actually the right choice. I probably should have had a boundary at some point with her, but the second part I think is really important, which is the, it's funny because I brought up the screenwriter versus TV writer thing at the beginning. And I think part of it is because I do think of us as really different creatures. Right. And I always tell people, if you are a brilliant writer, like if you're an incredible writer and you just like write gold, then like go be a screenwriter, like go sit in your attic with your typewriter and write beautiful words and sell them. But TV writing is not for you. Like TV writing is a communal thing where we sit in a room, like my last show had 12 writers and there were 12 of us around a big table, and you're stuck for 40 weeks if you're on a network show with the same 12 idiots around a table for like 10 hours a day with no cell phones and no computers. And all you have to do is talk to them. And so there's this piece in television writing that is so important that I feel like is really underplayed or undervalued until you're in it, which is like, you have to be a good hang and you have to be likable and you have to be somebody who can get along with the group. And one of the reasons that assistants and PAs and script coordinators and, move up and sort of get so many opportunities is because that's the audition year, right? Like that's your year of audition where they can sort of evaluate if you're a good hang and if you're smart. And I know I've said this before because people tweeted at me sometimes. I said it on some other panel or something, but I can, as a showrunner, I can take your shitty script and rewrite it, right? Like you give me episode 10, it's like, I'll take it home. I can do my past and turn it into the network. I can't do that to your shitty personality. And I think that is like the most important thing to know about TV writing. And so it's like, it's very dumb, but like the PA who comes in and like restocks the Diet Coke and puts the warm ones in the back and moves the cold ones to the front you're like, that person is so thoughtful. They'll be amazing in the room. I'm going to remember Tony because he was so thoughtful. He put the cold Diet Cokes in the front. And you're like, that's so stupid. What about my writing? And it's like, my big secret, like my big shame is that when Patty and Laura, my first showrunners, gave me my freelance, they had never read me. I was like, do you want to read my script? And they're like, no. They're like, honestly, we're busy. We're gonna give it to you either way. So like, it's fine. And so then I like wrote an episode of network television having no one had read me. The network didn't read me. The studio didn't read me. The showrunners didn't read me. Like TV is yes, it matters. You have to be a good writer. You have to be a good storyteller, but you also have to be somebody who can sit in a room full of people and sort of foster this very delicate creative environment, right? Because it's really vulnerable pitching and it's really hard and emotional sometimes to share really personal stories about your life. And even in comedy, like when I was on Awkward, which was a half-hour comedy, like I would tell really like gnarly stories about my dating life. And like, even that, which is like funny on the surface, still really sort of like one of the writers talked about shitting her pants on a first date, which like, and it's like this sort of, you have to have a safe enough space to be able to share those things and turn them into stories for TV. And so I think like my big piece of advice always is like, of course, make your writing as good as possible, but don't be a dick. Don't be the asshole who comes in the room who's like, I won these 4 fellowships. I'm an amazing writer, because like, I don't really care. I can always rewrite your script, but I can't rewrite your personality and who you are in the room. And that's in TV sort of the magic of what makes a great room and a great experience.
I love that. It's so exciting to hear that good people get ahead and people who care. Because sometimes I feel like in this industry, you feel a little bit like the people who cross the boundaries and take advantage of you are the people that get ahead. So it's really nice to hear that that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. I mean, look, certainly there's enough horror stories that it works the other way too, but
we won't focus on those right now. Instead, we'll focus on your writing, and you do so many, and they're all kind of drama, but I love that you do stuff like teen drama, like Switched at Birth and Awkward. You do thriller, like The Following, and then you do Jane the Virgin, which is basically a satire of the telenovela. And do those other forms, did those help you be able to write Jane the Virgin?
Yeah. I mean, certainly it's funny because Jenny, when she brought me on, I met the staff on Jane, like season 1, and they didn't have the money for me. And then season 2, I wasn't available. And then season 4, I passed because I was in production of a pilot. And then season 5, it finally worked out. So it was funny because like Jane felt like the show for my, it was like, we were like the ships in the night. It was a show that I always wanted to work on, and they wanted me consistently, and we just couldn't. And then finally season 5, it worked. And that was one of the things Jenny said, is like, we have sort of these fun, thrilling telenovela elements. And like, I don't have any writers in my room who've done like The Following. So yeah, I mean, certainly it helps to have, and look, it helps to have something on my resume too. People are like, whoa, Switched at Birth, the gentle family show about like deaf kids. And then they're like, The Following, where you murdered naked women every week. Like it, I think if nothing else, it makes me seem intriguing to people, which sets a high bar and a lot of disappointment when they actually meet me. But yeah, and here's the thing. It's like, when I interview on a genre show, because I've done, gosh, I think I've sold 5 or 6 pilots too, only one of which got made, none of which have made it on air. So take my advice for what that's worth. I've done 2 genre pilots because I like came up in the world of Buffy and Veronica Mars, and like sort of that. I think I've spent most of my career like really secretly just wanting to like make something like that. And but that said, when I interview in a genre pilot, what I say to the showrunner is, I am a big picture story arc, character arc person. So if you are bringing me in, like I have a friend who's a genre writer who is just encyclopedic knowledge about the Marvel universe, about Lord of the Rings, just all of the fandoms that you can be a fan of. And she has thousands and thousands of comic books. Like she can bring the authenticity to any comic book show or any genre show. Like she's written for some like very, very, very cool genre stuff and like big stuff. If that's what you're looking for, if you need someone to bring those details, like that's not me. But I think the reason I'm able to work in so many different genres is because I know my strength, which is that I'm a character arc storyteller. And so I can come into your genre show and say like, great, let's figure out a really compelling story arc in a really compelling way in which this genre is going to feel like allegory for something in the real world, and a satisfying twist and an unexpected, roadblock that pops up, and character relationships that feel complicated and messy in the best ways. And then Beth, you come on over and make sure that all the genre stuff is working, right? And it was sort of the same. And Awkward was a half-hour comedy, and in the Awkward room, I was like, I don't want to pitch any jokes. Like, I'm gonna like figure out the stories, and like you guys can make it funny. And my bosses one time were like, first of all, they're like, you are funny, which I love to be the funniest person in a drama room. I'm certainly not funny in a comedy room, but they made me stay. They were like, you can't go home until you write 15 alts for this one joke in a script. because they're like, you keep on saying you can't write jokes, and like, we are not. And so I just sit there until like 7 o'clock at night and write 15 alts for punchlines for a joke, and it was like the worst day of my life. So I've learned, like, it's a skill that I've sort of picked up, but I do think like the real answer is that I know what I'm good at, which is like any satisfying show, no matter what genre, no matter what length it is, has a compelling story arc, compelling character journey, has great conflict, it has sort of messy relationships. And like, those are the things that I can bring to a show. And so I think I get a lot of opportunities. And this is where it's sort of, the longer you're in the industry, the easier it is, because someone can call my last showrunner and say, hey, what is Liz good at? And he'd be like, oh, she's a story person. And then they'll be like, great, we have genre people. Let's bring in a story person, make sure our story's there. So did that answer the question? I started rambling.
Yeah, it did. It was, you gave us a lot more good stuff too. So thank you. So I love that you're doing this satire of a telenovela. And I think that the show in general and your episodes do a really great job of making it a satire, but not going so over the top that we end up with something that's like the SNL sketch Californians. Yeah. So how are you able to balance that and have the comedy in it without it being ridiculous?
That's a great question. I think that we never thought of it as satire, to be honest. We thought of it as an American telenovela. And so it helped that we were not trying to poke fun at something. We were trying to push the boundaries of a genre that was already outsized and sort of zany. And, this is where I have to give credit to Jenny Ehrman, right? This is why you want a fantastic showrunner with a really clear voice, because it was in her gut what was too broad and what was too big and what wasn't. So like, we would pitch things in the room sometimes that I'd be like, this is so crazy. Like, this is insane. And then Jenny would be like, yeah, that's going to work on this show. And I was like, what? And then like, you'd watch episode and you're like, yeah, she was right. I don't know how she knew that this thing was going to be way too broad and way too big. And that thing, like, the thing that popped in my mind when you were asking is, we did a whole show within the show where Rogelio, our telenovela star, was in a intergalactic space drama, and he was the president of Mars, but the atmosphere had changed his genetic makeup, and so he sprouted like a articulated tail that could do things on its own. And like, the bit whenever we went to set with him in Brooke Shields was that like, he would be talking and his tail would like grab a glass of water, and like so broad. Like, that is the stuff of like Alf, right? That's like it's like a sitcom. And I it's to me, there's no answer besides like, you hope to have a genius like Jenny Ehrman at the helm who just knows in her gut what's going to work and what's not going to work. And sure, sometimes, every once in a while we hit on a storyline that was sort of like, as every show does. Mm-hmm. But I think like, that's also the beauty of TV, is that you have a room full of people and they can pitch things from very small to very huge. And you hopefully have a showrunner who can sort through that and say like, yes, no, amazing. Or like, terrible, try again tomorrow. Because yeah, I mean, there were certainly, especially the Rogelio stuff, like we would spend like 3 hours sometimes going down the rabbit hole of like increasingly ridiculous stuff. And we would like crack ourselves up. And then like Jenny, and actually David Rosenthal was one of our EPs. He really had like, he really had a handle on Rogelio and all those storylines. So like, he was sort of the Rogelio whisperer, and like, he could really thread the needle on like what was insane and what was perfect for that character.
Oh my God, I love Rogelio so much, and his storyline and everything. It just, every time he was on screen, I was so excited.
And you if you ever meet Jaime, will love him too. He is Rogelio in the best of ways. Like, obviously Rogelio is ridiculous and Jaime is a real human, but like, what made Rogelio such a great character is that Jaime is such a great character and such a like fabulous human being. And he, he's so smart and such a good actor. And, but he's just exactly who you want. I remember I met Steve Carell once at a red carpet thing, mm-hmm. back when I was interning in entertainment news. And he was so serious on the red carpet, right? Like, and it was just fascinating because he was like, I think Sevilla Vargas was doing the interview, and she asked him like, how do you how are you so funny, basically? And he was like, well, I take it really seriously, and I play I find the truth of the character. And it was a really actory answer. I mean, it was like lovely and smart, but it was like, well, I don't think of it as a joke. I like find humanity and I ground it and I whatever. And because I'm playing it straight, it becomes funny. But it, like, in person, he was like very grounded, very real. He was like someone's, I don't know, nerdy chemistry teacher dad or something. Jaime Camille in person is like as fabulous as you want him to be. So I just like highly recommend, if you ever happen across paths him out in the wild, like bask in his aura, because truly part of the reason that all that insane Rogelio stuff worked is because Jaime is the one of the few humans on earth who could pull that off.
If I ever become a stalker, I'll go ahead and stalk him. Thank you.
He's worth it. Don't sue me, Jaime.
I really love hearing show running advice. I would like, do you have any best advice from Jenny?
From Jenny? Yeah. It's funny. One time I pulled out a piece of advice that Jenny gave me in an interview with Mark Cherry. Mark Cherry wrote it down, and I was like, yeah, Jenny's a genius. And it was this. I remember talking to Jenny about, I must have been my season 2 staffing meeting for Jane, about season 1 and how much I loved it, and how all the characters were so nuanced and whatever. And Jenny gave this piece of advice that has this is now just become a Jenny Erman fan podcast. Welcome, friends. We've got stationery. Jenny said, I do a pass on every script from every character's point of view. And that way I know that, because it's important to me that the villains think of themselves as the hero of the story, right? And like Petra, who was so evil season 1, everything Petra does has to be because she thinks this is her story and she's the hero, and it has to make sense in the context of her acting and what would be the heroic way in the story in her head. And if you get to a moment where they're just being evil for drama's sake, or because it helps your main character, or because it pushes your story along, that's when it begins to feel inauthentic. And that's when it begins to, not work. And so sometimes it's painful because you have to go back to the writer's room and say, like, this thing that made Jane's story really work well isn't ringing true to me. We need to find out a different way, a different obstacle to throw Jane, because Petra being evil for no reason isn't a good enough reason. And I think, like, it's funny because it led to this great conversation with Mark Cherry about how, like, you have to understand the psychology of the characters, right? And how, like, you can have really, because he's written some of the craziest women on television. And he said part of what informed that for him was talking to his friend who was a psychiatrist or a psychologist or something, who said, people who are struggling with mental health issues don't ever think that they're crazy. And it always makes sense in their heads. And that's in a, sort of more upsetting ways. Someone who struggles with mental health issues and believes that all of my actions make sense. This sort of the same advice, right? Like, you need to think about it from every character's point of view, because otherwise it's going to feel stagey and fake. The other great, okay, here's my other tidbit that I never ever have let go of. I was the writer's assistant after 90210 got canceled. I went over to The Following as a writer's assistant before I was a writer, where the fabulous Kevin Williamson was, the creator and showrunner. And man, if everyone could just spend 2 weeks in a writer's room with Kevin, it's like, I think I've learned everything I could have learned in grad school about writing. He's just, like Jenny, he's like a genius. Like, he's just a brilliant mind who like, some days I would leave and like cry, because I was like, my mind is never going to be that sharp. Like, I will never have a brain like that. Like, I will never be able to do what he does, because like, he's so smart. That said, so season 2 of The Following, we had a lot of procedural writers, because it sort of feels like a procedural, even though it was actually a serialized drama. And so they're really smart writers and they're really good at what they did, but they had all come up in rooms where you start the story from a place of like evidence and blood spatter and from plot, right? Like, you figure out who the killer was, who done it, how do you twist it to hide that, how do you make it feel surprising? And so it began as plot and not story. And Kevin would come into the room, because pretty quickly, I think he realized that was an issue with the room. And he would say, episode 4, what's the story? And a writer would be like, well, so Kevin Bacon finds the blood spatter and it leads him to this. And he's like, nope, that's all plot. What is the story of this episode? I will not hear you pitch it unless you can tell me what the story is in 2 sentences or less. And it amazed me how many of even like our co-EPs couldn't do that because the procedural world, and again, really good writers, I'm not knocking any of them because they're all, running big, franchises, and I'm here in Van Nuys in my tiny house. But it was interesting having come up in this sort of soapy world, in this drama world. I had approached story very differently. And I remember like the first time I got brave enough to really like ever speak when Kevin was in the room, we were on episode 4 and nobody could say what the story was. And he was like about to leave because he was like, all right, if you don't know what the story is, I'm not going to listen to the pitch. And I said, can I try? And he said, okay. And I said, I believe the story in this episode is that Ryan thinks the best way to keep his loved ones safe is to do everything on his own. But through seeking the bad guy as a lone wolf, he almost loses everything and realizes he's only going to win if he opens up enough to become part of a team. And Kevin goes, that's a story. Ryan's emotional arc is lone wolf to team player. Now you can pitch the plot to me. And first of all, it was the best moment of my life. But beyond that, I was like, oh, I get it. I get why Kevin's stories are so satisfying because he is you always put story first. And when I write pilots and when I, when I start to flounder in my own writing, I always go back to that 1 or 2 sentence, like, what is the story that I'm trying to tell? Because I'm getting caught up in the plot and I'm getting lost in the details. And this is a story about blank. So that's my best writing advice. By my best, I mean Kevin Williamson's best.
We all just are soaking up other people's information. So nothing's really new in this world.
Yeah.
But I'll give you credit.
Thanks, perfect.
Yeah. So you talked about an antagonists, but I want to talk about protagonists for a second. And you actually touched on one of the big things that writers have a problem with the antagonists. Usually they aren't fully developed. Mm-hmm. And you just talked about that, and that's awesome. And now I want to know about protagonists. And a big problem that people have with that is they don't give them a flaw, and they're not flawed. Do you have any tips for that? You do a great job with Jane the Virgin.
No, I don't have any great tips for this. I find protagonists the hardest characters to write. I have consistently been told that my sidekicks, my best friends, and my B characters are the most interesting in my pilots, and that I give them real emotional depth, and that my main characters are either like sort of flat or just vile people, because I make them too unlikable or make them too likable. It's so hard. It's so hard to thread that needle. And I think it's still something that I'm learning. I guess I'm taking a pilot out right now, and I feel the best about my protagonist that I've ever felt, although we'll see if the industry agrees. And I think what I really made sure to do is that all of the shitty things they do come out of a really relatable trauma. And I think like Veronica Mars is a really great example of that. Like Veronica Mars made so many mistakes, and sort of bad decisions all of the time, but it was rooted in such a complicated, relatable family trauma that you were like, I don't want you to do that, but I totally get why you're doing it, and so for me, that's always sort of the like, just making sure why, if you have a really selfish protagonist or a really hot-headed protagonist who does things without thinking, that you understand the why behind it, I guess, is I think probably the best advice I can give. Because like I did a pilot for Hulu a couple of years ago, and my friend Max read my first draft, and he said, I don't know how to say this, but this reads like it was written by someone who like absolutely hates men. He was like, all of your male characters are just like, they're the worst. And I was like, So then I had to like really delve into, I was like, do I take out their shitty behaviors, or do I figure out and justify their shitty behaviors? And I did a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, but it was, I had sort of been lazy about figuring out like, why does this guy use women and throw them away? Why does this guy withhold love from his children? You know, like, yeah, I've got daddy issues. So I was like, yeah, dads don't love their kids or whatever. Turns out if they have a reason for being withholding, it makes the story more compelling. So I think, yeah, just knowing why, and if you are not going to share the why with the audience, having a really compelling reason for keeping it to yourself.
So is that Kevin or Jenny's advice?
It's my advice. This is my
you do have some.
As it turns out, having now worked on, I think, over 200 episodes of television, I might have gleaned at least two of my own advice. And I think we don't always get it right? Like it's, I'm coming off of Dynasty on CW, which probably no one's seen because no one in America has ever watched it. But our lead character is this woman, Fallon, and the bigger of an asshole we made her, the funnier she was. But my boss and I were sort of constantly in a likability back and forth, where I would be like, this scene is so funny. I hate her, dude. Like, I think we need to make her a little more human, make her a little vulnerable. Like, what can we, you know? And he'd be like, yeah, okay, kill my darlings, you know? So it's like, it's still hard. It's always hard. And I think like, you know, the biggest trap, and I think especially I find this with men trying to write women, but as I've admitted, I don't know how to write a man. So, you know, we're all weak. I think people can confuse like quirky and sort of that like manic pixie dream girl thing with interesting or likable. And so I think like, they're like, oh, she's got funny stockings and 4 cats. And I'm like, that doesn't make her more interesting to me. You know, it's like, I think finding the things that make people interesting to you in real life and trying to like imbue your heroes with that. I don't know. Like I said, I'm a mediocre writer. I'm just great in a room. So she has someone who's good at the writing part.
Going back to men and Jane the Virgin, who is your favorite, Raphael or Michael?
It's funny being on the inside of it. Raphael, you know, I as a fan of the show, seasons 1 through, I mean, here's the thing. Here's what Jenny does so well, right? When she wanted me to root for Michael, I rooted for Michael. When she wanted me to root for Raphael, I rooted for Raphael. So like, you know, there are other shows. I'll go back to Veronica Mars. Like, Veronica and Logan forever for me. Like, Piz was great. I never ever once wanted her with Piz over Logan, even though Logan's like a total shithead. I shipped them so hard. Jenny is such a good writer. Not that Rob Thomas is also a great writer, but Jenny is really masterful. And she, yeah, when Jane and Michael were getting married, I wanted Raphael to fall off a cliff. And then when Jane and Raphael are coming back around, I wanted Michael to stay dead forever and ever. So I'll take no credit for it, but I will say, I think like it's the only show I've been on where I flip-flopped like that in a ship.
They're both. I always am torn. I love them.
Yeah. And they're really different. So it's also interesting because you're like, oh no, they're both, you know, it's like Sweet Home Alabama is, I think, like one of the best rom-coms in many ways because both men are viable options and one is right for her. And I think like that's one of the things that like that Jane did really right is that it wasn't one guy's a total dick and one guy's amazing and she just can't see it. These are both great guys and they're both great for her for different reasons, but one is right for her in the end, you know?
But who's really right for me is Rogelia.
Yeah.
So I think right now you're back with Jenny, I think, on the CW with the archives. Could you talk about that yet?
No, I mean, that died several years ago, but I will.
Okay. Sorry.
I'll talk about it though. So yeah, that was an interesting project because, so when I was on Jane, Jenny approached me and said, I'd love to do a project with you. Do you want to write a pilot? And I was like, yeah. And so I was very lucky because CBS, who's the studio that Jenny, you know, has a deal with, was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, can you get the rights to this book for me? And they were like, okay. And so CBS shelled out a bunch of money to get the rights to this book. And again, like something that would not be accomplished with me by myself at that point in my career, but with Jenny at the helm was like, you want rights to this book? You got it. And it was interesting because we really specifically developed it for the CW. We didn't pitch it anywhere else. And when I sold it, it was an hour teen drama, very much in the vein of Buffy, secret teenage sort of ghost fighter, living a double life, trying to keep it from her parents and her friends, why she was always bruised up and sneaking out and whatever. After we sold it to CW, the network said, we've just canceled Supernatural and we really need something to fill that space. So can you make it a dramedy with brothers? And I was like, no, I can't. Adult brothers. And I was like, no, I can't turn my moody teen drama into an adult dramedy with men. I can't even write men, as we've established. And so we sort of finally settled on an adult dramedy with sisters, which I'm more experienced with. And it was just a fascinating process because, yeah, I mean, working with Jenny's a dream. I will say, like, the thing that always happens with pilots is, like, especially genre pilots, is like you have a sense of how much genre should go into it. The network has a sense, the studio has a sense. So, like, I think one of the biggest learning experiences for me in that pilot was, like, make sure that you have the right network for you. I love CW. I've spent a lot of my career there, but, like, all of the sort of really cool ghost hunty stuff that I thought made it so unique. CW was like, yeah, boring genre, let's skip it. So in the end, it was like very little genre, a lot of sister drama, and it didn't go, which is fine. But it was a good experience to sort of, like, you know, you're balancing Jenny's notes and Jenny's executive's notes and the studio's notes and the network's notes. And I was also wildly pregnant at the time I was writing it with my first child. And that was a challenge too. But she was nothing but love for her and her production company, because it was a great to sort of get to develop under her wing and see her process. And
nice. So stepping away from TV shows, we're going to go to your screenwriter side and talk about the Hallmark movies. I just want to know real quick, because we haven't talked to anyone who does that, and that's such a specific genre, not just rom-com, but Hallmark. What is that like? I've heard they have strict rules on what you can and can't write. Is that true?
Yeah, I will say that nothing in my career has been harder than writing for Hallmark. And I keep on going back for more. Like, I just pitched them a new movie. So, like, love you, Hallmark. I'll be interested if they buy this new one and they want to make it. It's really changing over there. So I don't want to disparage anyone or anything. Knowing, I mean, not that I would anyway, but when I first wrote for them, they had a very specific brand. And I think one of the things that makes them the most successful cable network is they know their brand and they know exactly what works for them. And but I remember I was getting this note over and over from the executive, like, I need you to, like, age up the dialogue a little bit. Like, it's too hip, it's too whatever, you know, these are women in their 30s. And finally I was like, I am 35 and this is how I speak. Like, I've taken every slang word out. I've taken, like, I'm going to need you to, like, point out on the page which the lines are bumping, because, like, I don't know what you're referencing. Like, I feel like they're talking like Little House on the Prairie. And the example she gave me was I think it was like, when we broke up in college, she was like, you know, on Hallmark, we don't say broke up. We say when we parted ways, when our lives moved in separate directions. And I was like, okay, because none of my 35-year-old friends talk like that, but I can do that. Like, and it's interesting, like, they give you a list of rules at the beginning. Like, no, if they're staying in the same location, you have to have on screen, to film on screen and air on screen that they're going to different rooms. So it's very clear that there's no sleeping in an adjacent space. You know, just lots of stuff like that. No kissing until the end, usually. I've never had a network have such specific requirements. And, like, it's interesting because I think some of those people have gone over to, I think it's called GCN. It's their new Hallmark split, basically. And the guy who was running it went over and created this new network that is, I believe, sort of in response to Mark finally opening its doors to more people of color and different gender identities and sexual orientations. Mm-hmm. And so there's this new network that's gone back to those, you know, white Christian classics. Mm-hmm. But what's exciting about that is that it's opened the door to have more and broader stories on Hallmark. So I believe the story that I'm leading up to is that I had this whole sort of like British Christmas theme in one of them, where it was like Victorian carolers and Scrooge and whatever. And I had a little boy, like a 5-year-old, eating a sausage roll. It's like a really traditional Victorian Christmas, whatever. And I was told, like, it's too pervy to have a 5-year-old eat a sausage roll. And I was like, yeah, this is speaking to you, sir. If you think it's pervy to have a 5-year-old eating sausage, and like, we got a problem. So I think that I'm going to lose my place. This man's going to ruin me. So I just, they really, really, they take great care over there to make sure that nothing could be construed in any sort of light except for like very positive, very wholesome, very family forward, nothing too sad. I was asked to change a grandparent to a parent because old people are too sad. Wow. So a lot of that kind of thing.
I feel like if anyone could do it, it would be you, who could write a really good Hallmark satire. So I'm just putting it out there. I think you should do that.
Here's what I'll say is I went into Hallmark writing with a certain amount of ego, which was thinking that I could like take this sort of cheesy format and elevate it, right? Or like, I'm going to waltz in there and give it a little edge, make it a little, and as it turns out, like my first, all my Hallmark movies are like absolutely mediocre. I did not do any of that because it is not their brand to have an edgier version. It's not their brand to, and there was certainly quite a lot of arrogance on my part thinking like, oh, all they need over there is a good writer, because truth be told, they have lots and lots of good writers. They just have a very specific mandate and a brand that works for their audience. But I will say I'm heartened because I pitched this new thing to them and they came back and said, we're really going in a new direction with this new Hallmark. And we are looking for edgier stories, and we're looking for less traditional Hallmarks and fewer small towns and more queer stories. And is there anything you do to the story to make it less Hallmark? And I was like, yeah, I can. So I've sent them a revised pitch and we'll see if they want to do it. But I'm really curious to see where they go in the next few years. Because I do think that the contingent that kept it so tightly locked down within this sort of very narrow value system is now on this new network, and Hallmark is growing. My agent's going to call me tomorrow and yell at me. It's fine.
You talked about how you sold many pilots, and you have a lot of scripts going on, which is so cool. Do you have a favorite like passion project of everything you've written, past and present? Is there one that you want to see produced so bad?
Yeah, I would say there are two. I sold a sex comedy to TBS a few years ago that I was really, really proud of. That went super far. It went really far, and they like almost made it. And then but it was really similar to a show that Lena Waithe was developing for them as well. And they literally called me and said, we were going to greenlight your show. It's our favorite pilot that we have this season, but Lena Waithe just won an Emmy and she's really hot right now. And so we're going to greenlight hers instead, and we can't greenlight yours because they're the same. So we're going to give the rights back to you so that you can take it out elsewhere, because we really believe in it. I've told this story to Lena, and she hugged me and said, like, don't worry, honey, you'll get your chance. So I'm not saying this is any sort of, it was her time, and she did have a lot more star power than I did. Yeah. And so it was not about me versus Lena, but it was about like, oh, we were so close and I was so proud of it. And it's the one and only comedy pilot I've ever attempted to write or sell, and it sold in a really exciting place. And TBS at the time, like, it's disappeared now, but I never liked executives more. I think they were so smart, and their feedback made it better and smarter. And so I was just really, that one was a bummer. And then the pilot that I'm taking out shortly, I will be a little cagey about because we are like just taking it out, but I am partnering with Niall DeMarco, who you may know is a just hideously ugly deaf man who won America's Next Top Model. I'm just kidding. He's like the handsomest man that exists in the world. He's got 47 abs. He won Dancing with the Stars, and he won America's Next Top Model, and he's also an actor, and he just wrote a memoir that was a New York Times bestseller. And anyway, he is really passionate about getting deaf stories out into the world and making more opportunities. There's so many amazing deaf actors and deaf talent who, like, they all fight for the same role every year. It's just one deaf story a year, basically. And I have been trying sort of since Switched at Birth, and my great experience on that show, to get a deaf story, and have been told a lot, like, oh, people don't want to read subtitles. And then Coda came along and really, like, changed people's mind. And they're like, oh, maybe deaf is cool now. And so my agents are finally letting me sort of, like, pursue this this project that I'm really excited about. And I pitched it to, I just, like, cold called Niall's company. By I mean, I'm my agent. You can't just call production companies. Sorry, viewers, listeners. My agent called Niall and was like, Liz Sczudlo wants to meet with you. Will you take a meeting with her? And he said yes. And I pitched to him, and he's into it. So in the next week or two, we're going to start trying to take that out, and we'll see if anyone wants to buy it. But yeah, I'll be really, it's the first one in a long time that I, like, really want, and it's funny, as I say this, I realize almost all of my pilots have been based in IP. I just did a big adaptation of a best-selling book from the 90s, and with Callie Corey, who wrote Thelma and Louise. You may know her. She created Nashville. And Callie and I spent, like, 3 years doing this, like, really big project that is not going forward. I told you, I'm really good at killing pilots, guys. And even though it was 3 years of my life, and it was so exciting, and it was Callie, and it was a really big production company, I think probably something about it being IP and it being someone else's story that I was adapting made it a little bit less. The two pilots that I've, like, have been, like, the ones that are really personal to me, that I really like, that are, I guess, original ideas that I have put sweat, blood, and tears into.
Well, I think most writers kill many pilots, by the way. Well, at least on this show, we've had many talk about their shows dying, whether it was them or someone else. So you're not alone on that, but it still hurts.
Yeah, I mean, I think people don't realize how many pilots die every year, right? Like, in a traditional network, if you're talking about the networks, they'll buy like 75 to 100 pitches. They'll shoot 10 to 15 pilots, and they'll put 6 of them on the air.
Yeah, so, the death toll is high.
Yeah. It's much harder to make a pilot than sell a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you've given some, like, amazing advice. Is there any more advice you would give to up-and-coming writers that you haven't already given to us?
Yes. I would say to stop blaming people of color when you don't get jobs. There is, I've heard from both people that I have colleagues in the industry, and a lot of angry men on Twitter. There's this sort of notion and this sort of running thing amongst white people. Not a lot. I mean, some of them. There were some good white people out there. I'm a white person, if you're not watching the Zoom. I'm not good, but I'm white. It's become very easy to say, like, oh, I was so close to getting this, but they had to cast a minority. They had to do diversity casting. And I think a lot of showrunners and a lot of studios and networks and a lot of agents are doing some scapegoating right now, where it's easier to tell someone that they didn't get a job because they weren't white than because they are white, rather, than because someone didn't respond to the material, there wasn't room. And I just have to say, as somebody who is in these writers' rooms pretty actively, I have been in some of the most diverse TV rooms, just by the numbers. And I don't think I've ever been in a room that was over 50% non-white. And so I think this might be sort of like serious and soapboxy writing advice to end on, but I just think there is a weird, dangerous path to making its way available to some people right now, that where it's easy to be like, oh, I'm so talented, I'm so whatever, I'm getting excluded because there's only room for diversity hires right now. And I can tell you, as someone inside the industry, I'm still surrounded by white people all the time. And so I think, like, we are all in it together. We are all trying to get hired. We're all trying to get our next job. last year I had like 3 offers when Dynasty season 4 ended, and I stayed on Dynasty. This season then we got canceled and I had no offers. And it's it's just sort of how the pendulum swings and what jobs are available and what is open and what's not. And I just think supporting other writers, respecting their journey, respecting their climb, not feeling competitive with them, because it's not productive or fruitful to let the competition fuel you. I think it's really the only person you should compete with is yourself in trying to get into this. And then, I guess the other thing I would say is like, don't wait for your life. No, I'm gonna start over. You can cut this part out. I've learned podcasts you can edit. My other piece of advice is don't put off on living your life until you make it. I think so many people put aside really important life things because they're waiting for like, well, once I'm a writer, or once I've made it, once I've sold my script. And I started therapy finally when I was working on The Following as a story editor, which is like a second level. It was my second job on staff as a TV writer. It's like it meant that I was in, right? I'd survived my first year as a staff writer, and I was now into my second year as a real writer. And my career was looking promising. I was on a Kevin Bacon show. And I realized like all of these things that I thought were going to like fall into place and like click into, the puzzle and make sense. Like my life was still a fucking mess, right? I was still like a sloppy idiot, and I still had a dissatisfying friend group, and I still had no romance. And all of this validation I thought I was going to get out of finally making it, like did not arrive in a beautiful, neatly wrapped package. And I had to like, really unpack why I'd spent most of my 20s putting off forming a big, fulfilling, beautiful life, thinking that like the missing piece was a writing career. And I think the people that I know who are the most successful and the happiest are people who work really hard to make sure their lives are big and beautiful, fulfilling, regardless of what they do, and whose lives get more so because they've made the jump into getting paid to write, which, look, I'm not going to lie, like it's great. It's great to have health insurance. It is great to get paid to write. My husband's a rocket scientist, and I walked by his office this morning, and he's like literally trying to figure out how to keep people alive in outer space. I'm getting paid like 3 times more than him to like tell stories about, identical twins kidnapping each other. Like it's stupid, but I do think like, I know so many unhappy writers who just thought that getting paid to write or getting that first real gig was going to be the missing piece of their life. And it's just not. So I think like live your best life now. You're a writer if you're writing, right? If you are working on anything, whether it's just for yourself or whether it's for money, like you're a writer. So like, there's no reason that the rest of your life shouldn't be going on too, and that you shouldn't be living your life as you think you should. So take that for what it's worth, or wait until you're staffed and then pay a lot of money for therapy. Worked for me.
I love that. I think that's beautiful advice. So much of your advice just really speaks to me, and really enjoy. We haven't fully heard that advice. So thanks for sharing that with us and our listeners. So I want to end on, what shows are you watching, and what are some of your favorite shows?
Oh, great question. I think you can probably guess from the number of times I referenced it that I think Veronica Mars is really brilliant storytelling. I'm not going to say about season 4. I'm like, if and when I ever meet Rob Thomas, we're going to have like a big talk about why he made the choices he made. But like seasons 1 through 3 were great. I just watched Severance, and I think it's like brilliant. I think it's like an example of what a director can do to elevate writing, right? Like you can, it is flawless directing in addition to fantastic writing. And I just think it's really the whole package, and I hope it wins all the Emmys. I also love Ted Lasso. I mean, there's just an Apple TV Plus commercial now. I've recently gotten to The Bachelorette because the world is a tough place to live in, and it helps to watch stupid shit sometimes. Trying to think of other things that there's a show on Netflix. It's a Scottish show, I believe, called Lovesick.
Yes.
That is fantastic. And I believe it's what that Anna Kendrick rom-com-y show on HBO Max was based on, or what's that? She's like going on a bunch of dates. It's like her whole dating history. And then season 2, she's not the lead anymore. The cute guy from The Good Place is the lead. Okay, well, there's an Anna Kendrick show
Yeah.
that stole the format from this Scottish show that is excellent called Lovesick, in which the premise is basically the opening line is you have chlamydia, and in the UK you have to contact trace and disclose to all of your sexual partners. So the entirety of the show is him going back through the last 11 people he slept with and like finding a way to disclose, but through it you relive his romantic relationships, and there's an epic love story, and it's like really satisfyingly funny.
It's like COVID except with STDs.
Yeah, it's like the perfect answer to COVID. I mean, Insecure on HBO is fantastic and over, but you know, it's all there on HBO Max. For All Mankind, I'm back to Apple. What else do I watch? I don't know. Top Chef, classic.
So many good ones.
That's my favorite. Is it Veronica Mars? First 6 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it probably is Veronica Mars. I just think there was something a little magical about how the characters, storytelling, and acting all came together on that show. I mean, it feels dated now, and it feels, you know, certainly the production value and the, you know, directing is nothing special. No offense, Rob and company, but it, I just think in terms of like stories that really resonated on many levels for me, it was, and it's a great pilot. It's so hard to write a good pilot. Like I was just, Hacks is so good, right? But even the Hacks pilot, I was like, ugh, I hate this little girl. She's so annoying. That's an answer to your protagonist question. Figure out who writes Hacks and ask them, because like I hated Ava in the first episode, and I was like, I don't know if I can watch this show. This girl is so unlikable and so unsympathetic. And then by like the end of season 2, I die for her. So yeah, pilots are hard, and I think Veronica Mars is like a pretty near perfect pilot in a lot of ways. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and giving us wonderful advice, whether it was your advice or Kevin's or Jenny's. You gave us so much good stuff. So thank you.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Thank you,
guys.
Subscribe, rate, and review for more episodes. Thanks for watching the Deadline Junkies Screenwriting Podcast.